I'm gonna have to agree right there. So let's move on to a team that you're very high on, Reagan, the Miami Heat. I'm gonna mainly let you take the floor for this right here. I think that they're your biggest dark horse. My biggest dark horse is the Houston Rockets, simply because I think that coming off a 3-month layoff, I don't know how in shape guys are going to be. I know you're getting the 8, game period in which you're, getting back into the flow of things, before the playoffs officially start. But I have a feeling that a lot of guys are going to be preserving their bodies. I don't see a lot of defense being played, and things of that nature. I think that favors Houston because they're so explosive offensively. They got some good veteran players. I do think that teams that have veteran players on their roster are definitely teams that you should be favoring more. I think that teams like, Denver and things of that nature, teams that are pretty young, those are the types of teams that don't like to have these amount of layoffs. They just kind of like to keep playing. They want to keep that chemistry going. The veteran teams, the Lakers, the Clippers, I think that you should favor those teams. And also, I think the biggest knock on Russell Westbrook and James Harden in their careers basically has been sort of that they kind of been worn down in the playoffs, late in the season. They have not been the same players in the high leverage moments because they play a lot during the regular season. Russell Westbrook and James Harden go all out and they don't miss games during the regular season. So I think that if you have a rejuvenated and fresh, I know that Russ Westbrook is, a guy that's going to stay in great shape, and James Harden is in pretty good shape too, but I just think that you're going to get the best version of James Harden and Russ Westbrook. Now, will it be enough to overtake teams like the Clippers or Lakers? I don't know. So Houston is my biggest sleeper. I think they are the third best team in basketball behind the Clippers and Lakers. But you think the Miami Heat can actually make the NBA Finals? I look at the Heat. They have some good shooters. They've got a good head coach in Eric Spoelstra. And they did sweep the Bucks during the regular season. So I think there is some hope for Miami to make a run. I just don't know if I'm quite feeling it as far as them making the finals. I'll elaborate on that a little bit later. But what are your thoughts on the Heat, and why are you so high on this Miami Heat team?
So I placed them. I told you that I had the Raptors tied for second. That ties with the Celtics. Number one, I have Milwaukee, obviously, but I have that Miami Heat team right at fourth spot in the Eastern Conference in terms of likelihood to make the NBA Conference or the NBA Finals, just because I feel like the teams that are going to have the greatest advantage in this bubble playoff are the teams that knew exactly who they were going into that situation, right? Before the hiatus, before coronavirus hit and everyone had to go home, you had to have your identity established. Now's not the time to be figuring things out. Now's not the time to try new things. Now's the time to know exactly who you are and to go capitalize upon that. Now we see teams like the 76ers trying Ben Simmons at power forward, and that's great. I think that's something that should have been done long a time ago. But the fact that you're trying it now and not at the beginning of the regular season, that could spell disaster for the 76ers just because now is not the time to be figuring things out. The Miami Heat are one of the few teams in the NBA that I feel like had things completely figured out. They knew exactly what their identity was. They knew exactly what their minutes breakdown was, who they go to in certain situations. They know how their offense functions. They know how their defense functions. They know how their identity as a team functions. They had it figured out. And when you compound that with the fact that they're so youthful, I think those guys are more likely to be back in the swing of things quicker, just because those guys they're more likely to have stayed in shape than some of the older veterans. And that's just a team that's so driven, right? They're so hungry. You could tell that was part of their identity. You have this focal point, Jimmy Butler, and he's never been happy at any stop in his career. When he was with Chicago, when he was with Minnesota, when he was with Philly, he never really felt like everyone was driven towards that end goal of winning, not until he got to Miami. That's when he really felt the most comfortable with that team identity. So I do think that just because they have that edge, they have that 1-2, they have that hunger, and the fact that they had their identity already locked down solid, I think that gives them a huge advantage. And like you said, they sweep the Milwaukee Bucks in the regular season, who I think is going to be their biggest challenger come playoff time. I think Bam Adebayo is about as close to a Giannis stopper as you're going to find in the league. I don't think there's really one player that can stop Giannis by himself, but Bam Adebayo is about the closest thing to it. You got Jimmy Butler, who's a perfect matchup to guard Chris Middleton. I don't know, man. It's really a gut feeling, but there are definitely tangible reasons that I can identify as to say Miami they have a lot better shot than I think a lot of people are giving them credit for.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on some parts right there. Some parts I would disagree is that I don't know if Jimmy Butler is ready to be the best player on a championship team. I liked what I saw from Jimmy Butler last year versus the Toronto Raptors. I think that the Sixers are definitely a team that misses him because he was their go-to closer late in games. He was the guy that was hitting some of those big shots. And if it were not for that Kawhi Leonard lucky bounce in that, in that game 7, we may have been talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, with Jimmy Butler being that guy that takes the big shots, going to the Eastern Conference Finals. And I felt that they were a good matchup for the Bucks last year. But going back to the Bucks and things of that nature, I understand the Miami Heat swept Milwaukee during the regular season. And if I'm Milwaukee, that's a team I do not want to play. I think that it's probably likely that the Sixers and Heat will probably match up in the first round. I would favor Miami over Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia is the most overrated team in basketball. I just don't believe in them. I've talked about that. Philadelphia 76ers fans get mad at me. I don't care. But yeah, when I look at things from the Bucks perspective, they swept them during the regular season. That's the key word. Regular season. Now, with teams that are not going to be playing back-to-backs, you got all the time to prepare for these teams. I just think that over time, you gotta beat Milwaukee and Boston 4 times. I think Miami can beat them maybe 2 or 3 times, but I just don't quite know. I think that Boston is a team that is very, very good. I don't think that Boston could quite knock off Milwaukee if they face them because of the style they play. They're a little bit more of a smaller team. Milwaukee is a bigger team. I don't think they can stop Giannis. But Miami is one of those teams that could give Giannis some problems. So I'd be willing to say that might be an upset. I just want to see how these teams kind of play before I start making predictions saying that Miami's going to beat them and things of that nature. Maybe elaborate on some of those things. And why should we believe Jimmy Butler is the guy that's going to be the best player on a championship team that can lead them to the NBA Finals maybe?
Well, we've seen this from Jimmy Butler in the past. He definitely has the edge to come up clutch in those moments, but I really don't even think it's a thing to where, I know I just talked about Kawhi Leonard, but it's more about how the Miami Heat function as a unit than it is how, one individual player can step up. And the thing is, Milwaukee, I think the reason why they struggle with Miami so much is that Milwaukee is a team that's essentially said, in this 3-point shooting era, Mike Budenholzer, he's had the balls to go ahead and say, we're going to give you the 3-point shot and we're going to shut down everything else. We're not going to give you any easy baskets at the rim. We're not going to give you, that sort of short mid-range area. They're locking all of that down. So they're forcing you essentially to shoot those 3-point shots. And you know what, Miami, they're pretty apt when you got Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson. Those guys can shoot the rock a little bit. And that's a lot of what their offense is giving those guys those back screens to where they can roll off and get those catch and shoot open threes, and they killed them with that. I'm sure I can't speak to it directly, but I'm sure if you go back and look at the stats for those games, Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero, they were probably getting off a little bit. So I just think it's the way that Milwaukee plays, and given that Milwaukee is the team to beat in the East, of everyone that I look to, the Miami Heat are the most apt to beat them just because of the way Milwaukee plays versus the way Miami plays. Now you can get into the question of whether or not Miami has enough, diversification when it comes to their offense, to consistently beat the teams that they'd have to beat to get to Milwaukee. But I think that they do when you have Goran Dragic. That's an X factor that I think a lot of people aren't really talking about. Jimmy Butler, obviously, he can be that guy. I just don't, when we talk about is Jimmy Butler ready to be the best player on a championship team, I wouldn't build a team around Jimmy Butler per se, but I don't think this team is necessarily built around Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler was more just the last cog that needed to go into the team for it to function at the rate that we've seen it function and for it to be as successful as we've seen it through the course of the season. So I do think that the team holistically is a championship contending team. Whether or not Jimmy Butler is the guy that you want to build a team around, we can get into that debate, but I like the way the team is constructed.
Now, do you think lack of experience could hurt the Heat come playoff time? Now, they did add Andre Iguodala to the team, and they have Jay Crowder on the team. So those are 2 veteran players that have played a lot of games, that have playoff experience. And obviously, Jimmy Butler has had some moments in the playoffs where he's kind of, gone a little bit deep. I don't think he's been to a conference finals. I could be wrong about that. I apologize if I am. I don't think he has been to a conference finals. But yeah, you look at Kendrick Nunn, good player, good young player. Tyler Harrell, good young player. But some of these guys that Miami relies on are younger players. Bam Adebayo, a good player, but he hasn't quite been there in those big moments. So does experience worry you as far as Miami goes? And looking at teams that, assuming they potentially could get to the finals, I don't personally think they get to the finals, but say that they pull off the upset versus a Boston or Milwaukee and get to the finals, how do they match up with the Lakers, Clippers, or Rockets? Teams I think they're probably most likely to be meeting them if they get to the finals.
It's going to be a tough swing. We all know the Western Conference is very stacked, especially at that top end. So I'm not sure if Miami would have the endurance to run that race to its fullest extent. But I do think that the NBA Finals is a realistic possibility for that team. Remind me what your first question was, though. It's eluding me.
I just talked about how you got Kendrick Nunn, you got Tyler Hero.
Right,
you got some good young players, but are they experienced enough to go over that hump?
So I think that gets circumvented by the fact that they just have that certain level of edge. And when we talk about young players and are they ready to step up in the moment, it's usually because they're a little bit too timid. They're not sure exactly what they're supposed to do, who to defer to in that moment. I think you have a leader like Jimmy Butler, and then you have a bunch of players who have edges. Like when I think of a guy like Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, they're young, but they all have an edge. Even Kendrick Nunn, they have a certain edge, a certain chip on the shoulder that they play with. So I doubt that they're gonna shy away from that limelight in those moments where they need to step up. Now, I don't think anyone's gonna be asking them to do, obviously a kick out situation might happen where they have to hit a big shot every so often, but I'm not sure if anyone's gonna be asking them to handle the bulk of the workload in those big moments. I see that going off to Jimmy Butler and Goran Dragic, possibly Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder. But I have faith in those kids. I do think that they just have that certain level of tenacity and stick to itiveness that they would need to ascend in those moments where they had to step up a little bit. So I'm not worried about their youth at all. I think that would be an issue for a lesser, what's the word I'm looking for? For a team that's not as mentally tough as Miami. That would be an issue for them, but Miami just has that level of mental fortitude to rise in those moments.
You do make a good point about that because when we look at Miami, what do they have to lose? You look at Milwaukee. People expect Milwaukee to get to the finals. They got the best record in basketball. You look at Boston. I would favor Boston over Miami. So it's kind of Miami against the world. So I think that definitely is an underrated factor, as far as Miami goes. They really don't have anything to lose. And with this whole, NBA bubble going on with guys having the 3-month layoff, anything's possible. So, again, I don't think Miami gets to the finals, but I do think they could upset the Bucks or the Celtics or a team like that. So we shall definitely see how Miami fares in the playoffs. Thank you so much for watching this video today. Please also note that the Juiciest Sports Podcast is not just a YouTube channel. It is available on all podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this content with all your friends. This podcast is my favorite thing in the entire world right now. It is my passion. And I want more people to listen to this podcast. I really want this podcast to grow. Also, a fun fact about me is that I want to go into the sports broadcasting and media world once I graduate from the University of Toledo, a college in Northern Ohio. I currently am a freshman there right now. I am looking to become one of the next great sports broadcasters and analysts out in the world. And I potentially would like to start my own network if this podcast really truly grows. Or if I fall short of that goal, I would love to work for a big time network like ESPN or Fox Sports 1. I am open to all networks. So if you believe in my dreams and you see or hear my passion through the screen, be sure to tell all your friends about the Juiciest Sports Podcast. Stay motivated, you guys. Have a God bless day, and I'm out.